Okay. Can you hear me all?
Yes, we can hear well.
Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you very much. You all are welcome to the this panel discussions on behalf of the National Center for Advanced Studies for Humanities and Social Science, NCAS. I would like to welcome you. Firstly, our two speakers, the panel, Professor Jayadev Uyangoda and Professor Sankati Lekaratne, and all other participants. So the NCAS, we have decided to actually conduct a series of lectures based on philosophical, methodological foundations of social research in general. So I think there are 400 students, actually over 400 participants registered. I'm sure now we have around 273 at the moment. I'm sure they might join with us later on. So as you all know that this is something we wanted to actually carry on for every month. You see, this is the inaugural basically panel discussions. First of all, I want to thanks on behalf of the NCAS, Professor Jayadev Uyangoda and Professor Asankati Lekaratne for kindly accept my invitation and participate today. And so we will basically, apart from this, this kind of panel discussions, we will also conduct weekly and courses on research methodology. Time to time, we will actually announce that. So we are inviting you to sort of participate that the discussions as well. So these are a bit of a actually there will be a small fee for that, but this lecture series definitely every month it will conducted by the NCAS, inviting representatives both locally and internationally, so that we will actually info when time come. Let me actually introduce today's our first speaker. Today's title, as you all know, that the philosophical foundations of research. You see now in Sri Lanka, because researchers, they are really bit of a lack of philosophical understanding of research. So therefore, we thought of we should actually disseminate that knowledge to the Sri Lankan academia and the researchers and public who are interested in research in the context of you see humanities and social science. Professor Jayadev Uyangoda is one of the key thinker of this particular area of philosophy. Though he is coming from a political science background, Emeritus Professor Jayadev Uyangoda, actually he received his basic education, not the basic education, higher education in Peradeniya University. Then he received his PhD University of Hawaii, East West Center. And actually both speakers the product of University of Hawaii. Then Professor Uyangoda basically received his chair professorship in 2012, Professor of Political Science and Public Policy at the Department of Political Science and Public Policy, University of Colombo. He has written several books and book chapters and over hundreds scholarly articles for his credits. And quite importantly, actually, he wrote a very interesting book, Social Research, Philosophical and Methodological Foundations, published by SSA in 2015. Then also, similarly, he wrote another actually book in Sinhala, Samajiya Manavidya Parreshana, Darshanika Kramavedi Handinima Kela, Didas Dahedi Liela Thina Tawa Potak. There he is also written another book, Samajiya Vidya Parreshana Yojanavaliya Klivima, Niyayika Saha Prayogika Makapenvima Kela. So, Professor Uyangoda, we all know that, he's a well-known researcher. He has been serving not only Sri Lankan universities, but also the universities all around the world. And so without any delay, I just wanted to thank once again and invite Professor Yangudu to actually give his talk on this particular topic. Thank you, Professor Yangudu.
Thank you, Professor Premakumara, for initiating this series of lectures and panel discussions. And I'm very happy to notice that there is quite a large number of participants, and also some participants are non-Sri Lankans. So we have international participation as well, and this shows the level or the degree of interest that our young scholars have in the theme of philosophical foundations of social science research. We have a very limited time, so our topic warrants actually a semester-long graduate course. So Professor Asanga, I and Professor Premakumar, it was a very challenging task today. But what I will be trying, I'm sure Professor Asanga and Professor Premakumar will share my feeling that what we can do today is to generate an interest among all of you in the connection between philosophy and research, and then develop that interest into studying that link systematically, and then employ the philosophical insights into your own research. So first I will speak in order to make that link between philosophy and research clear. Then let's start with the question, what is research? And let's try to find something like a philosophical answer to that question. So, Professor Premakumara, that handout, shall I get it on the screen?
You can share, but that is at the website, NCAS website.
Let me see whether I could. How do you do that?
Can you share that?
That's-
Can you allow Professor Yangudu to share the screen?
So then we can, people can have a look at the handout as well.
Actually,
Slides.
yes, sir. Sir can share the screen.
Yes, you can share the. Yeah.
Now sir can share the screen.
So what would be the? Are you going to have it on screen? No.
Yeah, it is there now. We can see.
No, not that one actually. You have to go a little further. I think I have wrong. I'll send you the. What is research? There.
Yeah.
I can see that. What is research? A philosophical answer to that question is that research is an exercise in the creation or production of knowledge. So it's an exercise in the production of knowledge, in the creation of knowledge. You see, the word knowledge there is a philosophical term. You see that the meaning of that word has also changed, from classical Indian and Greek times to the contemporary times. But in the classical world, knowledge creation has been the vocation of philosophers and thinkers and not researchers. Right? The idea of research or researcher is a fairly recent idea. You see, until about the 19th century, mid-19th century, it was the philosophers and thinkers who produced knowledge. But what happened after that in Europe, in America, and elsewhere, the modern universities
Recording stopped.
modern universities began to dominate the function of knowledge creation. So the very concept of researcher is also a fairly recent concept. Then when we say that, knowledge creation, when we use that concept, knowledge creation or production of knowledge, the whole, the entirely another new concept emerges. That is that method of the production of knowledge. You have to have, methods in order to produce or in order to create knowledge, because knowledge creation is not an arbitrary exercise, however much we want to be arbitrary. So, when we talk about the methods of knowledge creation, we need to have a clear understanding or clear distinction. We have to make a clear distinction between method and methodology.
Recording in progress.
So that's where, in most of the Sri Lankan and I know South Asian universities as well, these two concepts, method and methodology, are kind of, taken to mean the same thing. And that is a kind of a confusion in terms of concepts. One of the points I want to make in this brief presentation is that there is a distinction between methods and methodology. Now, the concept methodology means, literal meaning of that concept is the science of methods. In other words, methodology is about philosophical foundations, philosophical assumptions, and justification of methods. That's one part of the meaning of the concept methodology. It has a second component in its meaning, that is the logical reasoning chosen for the
Recording stopped.
knowledge about either the natural world, social world, or the human world. So thus, methodology as a concept answers two questions.
Recording in progress.
The question one is that, so now I'm going to introduce one or two, philosophical terms to you, but I will explain the meanings. So the first question that methodology, the concept of methodology answers is that on what epistemological grounds that have you or have I chosen a specific set of methods or a combination thereof. That's the first question it attempts to answer. The second question it attempts to answer is, what method of reasoning or the logic have you opted in your approach to data, theory, and interpretation? Either it is inductive method, or whether it is a deductive method, or as it has been argued these days, whether a mixed or abductive method. So, in terms of the first question, that's on what epistemological grounds has the researcher chosen a specific set of methods or combination of methods? Answers would be something like empiricist method or positivist approach or methodology, post-positivist methodology, constructivist methodology, interpretationist methodology, or realist methodology, or feminist methodology, or postmodernist. There's a whole range of choices one has to make. I'm sure many of those who have been writing your postgraduate proposals would have faced this challenge, what kind of methodological approach that you would be employing in your research? Is the empiricist method, positivist method, post-positivist method, constructivist method, or interpretationist method, or feminist method? Now, all these words, when we describe their methods, actually it's a epistemological approach. That's why it's called methodology. I said, what is your epistemological approach? So all these concepts have emerged and evolved over nearly 2000 years in Western philosophy. And they have taken a special significance in research after the 17th century in Europe. And similarly, about the logic or logical reasoning, whether it is the inductive logic or deductive logic that you have been using or you want to use, it's also an issue that became a highly controversial theme in the Western philosophy after the 17th century. Now, don't worry about these big terms at the moment. These are the terms that are actually regularly used in what we call philosophy of science or philosophy of social science or philosophy of humanities. But eventually, when you want to, find out the philosophical foundations of the choices you make in terms of your methods, you will be able to learn these concepts and also the approaches and methodologies that are described by these concepts. Now, let me give you a kind of a practical example. When you write your research proposal, you have to indicate what kind of research methods you would be employing in the collection of data or in order to collect your evidence or facts. What are the methods? So then it's sometimes I know a lot of postgraduate students and young research scholars find it extremely challenging in making a decision about methods. The reason is there are so many methods available in order to be able to collect data for your research. For example, you can do field work. In doing field work, you can do household surveys. You can administer a questionnaire. You can do sample surveys. You can also conduct qualitative interviews. You can conduct short, like half an hour interviews with a small sample of, research participants. Then sometimes you can also do what is called focus group discussions or participant observations. And these are various methods of collecting data. Now the challenge before you as a researcher who is working on your research proposal is that on what grounds that you would be making choices in terms of your methods of data collection. And that is a very challenging question for many young scholars who are writing their research proposal. What they often do is that they go and ask their supervisor. Then the supervisor tells the student or researcher that these are the methods of data collection that is more suitable for your research. But that's one way of making choices concerning methods of data collection. But the method that we want to propose to you is that instead of either selecting your methods arbitrarily or selecting your methods merely by listening to the advice given to you by your research advisor, you should be able to make that decision. You should be feeling empowered to make those decisions to select your methods of data collection. And in order to do that, you need to be able to justify your choice of methods. That justification, if we use the language that, or rather concept or words that are being used in philosophy of science, you have to have a methodological justification. And your methodological justification should have epistemological grounds. And what is epistemology? Epistemology, the simple meaning of that concept is the science of knowledge. In other words, the concept epistemology is about how do you know what you know. So that's sort of epistemology. Epistemology is the science of knowledge, or philosophy of knowledge. Then, if you want to use, say, qualitative interviews as opposed to, brief interviews by administering a questionnaire, then you have to be able to answer why you are making that decision not to use the short interviews or just to administer a questionnaire, but to rely on qualitative data or other qualitative interviews. Instead of interviewing your research participant for half an hour, you would be spending maybe days, hours and days with your research participant in order to get what is called qualitative data. So even this distinction between quantitative data and qualitative data has a epistemological or philosophical foundation. It is about how do we understand social reality. Can we understand social reality merely by, interviewing, a sample of research participants, or do we have to really spend, extended time with the research participants in order to understand their own subjective experience and how do they make sense of the world themselves in their own social and cultural terms. So that means, there are two approaches to data collection, two approaches to the idea of data. There are two approaches to how to make sense of data, how to collect data, what kind of data. And these two approaches come from actually two competing traditions of epistemology in philosophy, in European philosophy of science. Two competing traditions. So that is, why when a researcher makes decisions concerning methods, that researcher can make informed decisions if he or she is familiar with the philosophical foundations of those methods. Similarly, when a researcher makes a specific decisions about methods of research, and that has to be justified as well. In a research proposal, what you need to do is not only to indicate what are your choices in terms of methods, and also why you have made these decisions. Why have you chosen either one set of methods or one combination of methods as opposed to so many others? Then that, in a methodological terms, is justification of your choice of methods. And just that justification has to be a philosophical justification, or in other words, epistemological justification. Not just, you are making those decisions in terms of methods. So for methods, not just because these are convenient methods, or not because these are the methods that your supervisor has prescribed to you. No. Instead of doing that, you can make a philosophically grounded justification of your own choice of methods. That is why it is important and it's extremely helpful for researchers to be familiar with the philosophical roots and philosophical assumptions and philosophical foundations of research. Because each research method and each methodology that explains that method is constructed on a set of philosophical assumptions. That's about the world, about the human society, about human existence. There are philosophical assumptions. And when we say philosophical, I also want to make it very clear that we don't have to get intimidated by the idea of philosophy. Because sometimes when you say that, philosophy of research, people, particularly, researchers who do not have a philosophical academic background get intimidated. So the point I want to make is that don't feel intimidated by the idea of philosophy. Actually, philosophy, and Professor Asanka Tilakaratne knows philosophy more than I do, philosophy has at least 4 or 5 branches. One branch is metaphysics. It's about, some very fundamental questions. Metaphysics asks some very fundamental questions about the world, about life, about existence, like Abhidharma in Buddhism. And then there's a philosophy of aesthetics, from Aristotle downwards, philosophy of aesthetics. Then there is also in philosophy there is ethics. What is good or bad about human action and the consequences of human action. That's the branch of ethics in philosophy. And there's also what's called soteriology. Soteriology is about the salvation of the soul. And many religious philosophers have focused on soteriology. That's what happened to our soul either in this life or life after. That's soteriology, or emancipation of the soul. But we are not talking about any of those branches here. Actually, we are focusing here only one single branch of philosophy, which is epistemology. So you don't have to study metaphysics. You don't have to study ethics or soteriology or aesthetics in this case, but if you have time, you can. But what is important is for us to be familiar with epistemological foundations of knowledge production and the methods of producing knowledge and also justifying our knowledge claims philosophically. So, Professor Prem Kumar, I think I will stop there. So that's a very brief introduction to the connection between philosophy and research.
Yes, thank you, Professor.
Professor Asanga can, I think, continue from here.
Yeah, so you can take up that if there are questions at the end. Thank you very much, Professor Vyangoda, by emphasizing that we should basically have sort of philosophical roots and the foundations of our research, right? So you have emphasized that the importance of having such a philosophical, basically foundations of our research. So without intimidating, you see, we need to basically grounded our research in the philosophical traditions that you have basically highlighted here. And so we can have a discussion later on, but thank you. Now let me introduce Professor Asanka Tilakaratne. Actually, no need to introduce him, but he's well-known Buddhist philosopher and the Pali and Buddhist scholar. Professor Asanka Tilakaratne, actually, he was a professor of Pali and Buddhist Studies at the University of Colombo at the Department of Buddhist Studies. And he also actually did his PhD in University of Hawaii, East West Center, having won the East West Center Fellowship. In 1992, he received his PhD from Hawaii. And then also actually he has published a lot of materials, at both book forms and the chapter forms, and also articles. And he is one of the well-known Buddhist philosopher, actually, after K.N. Jayatilaka and Professor Kalupahana and all other lineage of Sri Lankan Buddhist philosophers. And without delay, then I wanted to really invite Professor Sangaratna to share his. Actually, he has a very interesting knowledge, both Eastern philosophy as well as the Western philosophy. That is why actually his involvement here is so important. Over to you, Professor Tilakaratne. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Premakumara. It was not very clear what you were saying as introductory remarks, but I'm sure you must have said something good about me. So, and also I don't see myself in the screen either. So you have to bear with me if you don't see me clearly or whatever.
We can see you clearly, no problem.
So what you can do is there is that you can just click on start video. In that you can see another part. You can click it and video setting. Just go to that and click. Then you can just increase the volume of lights there.
Okay, that is sounds like
start with your left side down, left side down, start video.
Yeah, that's right. That's there. Then video settings are there. Should I go there?
You go to setting.
Okay.
Then lighting. Just you can increase lighting. Just drag it right side.
Okay.
Drag a little right side.
Mirror my always display. Now, yeah, I can.
Now it's all right. Yes, yeah, okay. I can see.
I think I should not waste time here. So, Professor Premakumara, thank you very much for this invitation. And speaking after Professor Uyangoda on research methodology, who has really compiled two very comprehensive works in both English and Sinhala, is in a way makes my job much easy, but at the same time, I am placed in some kind of disadvantageous situation. What I would like to do is sort of following up what Professor Uyangoda said, and then try to expand a little bit more on some of the things he said, because in this kind of seminar, as Professor Uyangoda at the very beginning said, this kind of 1 year whole course we are trying to summarize within 2 hours. So let me pick up few things. One is at the very beginning, Professor Uyangoda clarified the distinction between method and methodology, which I think is everything sort of we are discussing here today. Now, somebody could think why we should really study methodology. Because if you look at some kind of parallel situation, most of us drive our cars, our vehicles, but I mean, we don't, I mean, know next to nothing. We know next to nothing about the engine and how it works and all that, simply we know that, when we use the switch and it starts working, that's all. So somebody can ask, why do you have to study methodology in the first place? Why do you have to study this, the philosophical aspect? In fact, my answer to that question would be, now, you can really do sometimes research by mere guidance of your supervisor or somebody without really understanding why you are using certain methods, because anyway you are using methods. So how I would like to respond to this question will be, now if you are just following research methods without knowing about the philosophical foundations, what happens is, so what could happen is that you will ultimately be ending up doing your research, but you will be just a follower of a given method without really being able to critique and being able to know for sure, why did you follow that particular research method? In other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that if you do not know research methodology, the philosophy behind it, you will be just a practitioner of particular thing and follower of particular, say, discipline. But of course, you will not be able to be a leader. You will not be able to be a pathfinder. So in other words, whole point of discussing research methodology is to make real advance to the knowledge and also illuminate the research path. Now, that is how the research, with the research methodology, ultimately the quality of the research develops. And also earlier, Professor Yangoda used the word informed decisions. Now, our whole practice of making informed decision has much to do with studying philosophical aspects of the methods we are using. So in that sense, it is not only sufficient for us to just make use of certain method without knowing it is philosophical and broader conceptual implications, but it is much better for us to be aware of the underlying epistemological, ontological implications of the research methods we are using. Now, in fact, when we talked about this methodology, we are talking about really the philosophy. Now, philosophy is something that goes beyond our ordinary, the ordinary subjects. It is knowledge about knowledge. Now, here I remember one of the very early Indian authors use the following term in referring to philosophy. Of course, they use the term anvikshiki. Anvikshiki means looking at something very minutely, like microscopic view. So this very well-known statement, Pradipah Sarva Vidyanam. So this is a Pradeepa, this is a lamp, Sarva Vidyanam, for all the sciences. Now, I think this Pradeepa Sarva Vidyanam, lamp or light to all sciences, is very interesting because science already has knowledge. Now, what is the meaning of saying that there is something that can shed light on these systems of knowledge? Actually, that is what is called philosophy. So there can be systems of knowledge, there can be corpus of knowledge we gather from various sources, but to give light, to give eye to that type of body of knowledge is philosophy. So of course, these are open for interpretation. And then the next question I would like to reflect on is, now basically we are discussing here humanities and social sciences. Now, one important question is, as Professor Yangoda said, okay, research is the production of knowledge. Now, how to produce any kind of new knowledge? Now, the whole point of doing a research is to extend the domain of the limit of existing knowledge further. Now, if we do not make any contribution towards that, of course, our research is in vain. So we must be able to make big or small or whatever, some kind of new contribution to the existing knowledge. So in other words, if a friend asks when you complete your PhD or MPhil, what did you do? You must be able to say in few words, this is what I did. So that is your contribution of knowledge. Now, important question is, how do you really contribute or discover any kind of new knowledge in this field? Now, for instance, if you are in natural science, suppose you are studying astronomy, you study sky, and then lo and behold, suddenly you bump into a star that has never been identified so far. So you give your, say, child or wife's name or whatever, and then you say to the world that, you discovered this star. Now, this is a clear example of new knowledge, because nobody knew about this star before, and now the world knows about it. So it is something you discovered. So it is your contribution. So in other words, natural sciences, this concept, or you are a chemist and you discover some kind of chemical solution or some kind of virus, and then that can be your contribution. But what would be the contribution in social sciences and humanities? I think I don't think we can really discover new forms of knowledge like discovering a new star or something. But there can be various ways of course, discovering certain new knowledge. Let me give you an example from philosophy. Now, this happened in 1963, more than 50 years ago. Most of, I'm sure you have not even been born. And the American philosopher called Edmund Gettier wrote a 3-page paper. Now, this is very unusual for humanities and social sciences. People write in 3-page papers. Now, in natural sciences and mathematics and physics, sometimes entire dissertation can be like 20-25 pages. But then here, this man wrote 3-page paper. And in this 3-page paper really made the kind of revolution in the philosophy world, particularly in the philosophic world of North America. Now, what did he do with this? Now, the Professor Yangoda referred to knowledge. Now, there is a very respected age-old theory about knowledge in philosophy field. We call it JTB theory. JTB means J for justification, T for true, B for belief. Now, the definition of knowledge is given as knowledge is justified true belief. Now, this goes as far back as Socrates. In Plato's dialogues, Theaetetus, and also I think in Meno, this discussion is there. So there's a lengthy discussion by Socrates, what is knowledge? And then finally they discuss this JTB, what we call JTB theory, the knowledge is justified through belief. And but as usual, Socrates doesn't draw a conclusion, leaves it open. Now, generally for 2000 years, people believed that although Socrates did not draw a final conclusion, knowledge is justified through belief. So in order something to be knowledge, it must be how you got that knowledge has to be justified. It has to be really true, corresponding to reality, and you must believe it. So these three aspects is considered to be knowledge. Now this Getier's thing is in a way, it goes into the heart of logic, which I'm not very competent at this moment, or I don't want to go into that. But let me give you a version of this example from Bertrand Russell. Now, Russell came up with this example. Now, example is, suppose I want to go to hospital 12 o'clock midday noon someday, and then I go to the city where the hospital is, and then I look at the clock tower, and clock tower says 12 o'clock. So I know that it is 12 o'clock. So this is the time for the opening of the hospital. I go to hospital, and then I find that door is open at 12 o'clock. Okay, fine. But the problem is this clock had stopped day before, exactly at 12 o'clock. So although I looked at the clock and it said it is 12 o'clock, and it was really right. For some lucky accident, I happened to have looked at this at exactly at 12 o'clock. So it worked for me. But on the other hand, Gettier, giving a similar example, argued that although your belief is okay, but your justification is false. It's only a lucky accident that the clock showed 12 o'clock, but actually the time was not 12 o'clock. I mean, actually the clock had stopped day before, so it was only a lucky accident. Now this is considered to be a counterexample. Now the theory accepted up to this point was JTB theory. Now it is thought that Edmund Gettier provided the counter example for this age-old theory. Now, ever since practically several dozens of papers have been written on this, arguing and ways of trying to come out from this and resolve the problem, all types of things, and hundreds of people have referred to this problem. But now I would consider this is a very interesting example of how to provide new knowledge in humanities and social sciences. Now, in particularly, of course, philosophy belongs to social sciences, and then a study of knowledge can be psychology, and many other things. But basically, there is a very important aspect of knowledge. We study epistemology, we study in philosophy. Now, this counter example, which he provided in paper, is, I mean, very, very important contribution. Now, I tell this story to you to get an idea what are we really looking at, what kind of discovery we looking at when we talk about new knowledge in this field. I mean, new knowledge may not necessarily be a piece of information. I mean, that is something very important for us to understand. New knowledge can be leading to something. So even critique, which will lead to something new, something more, or even something improved or better, could be new knowledge in this particular field we are talking. So we can be providing a critique, or we can be give more examples, and then counter example. Providing a counter example is really a challenging the existing existing principle or accepted thing. Now it is very interesting when it comes to particularly humanities, say subject like philosophy. There are certain things in history of studies. We're starting from Confucius in China, or Buddha and Jaina Mahavir in India, or Socrates, Plato in ancient Greece. There are certain issues we have been discussing ever since, but in fact, without drawing any final conclusion. Say, for example, if you take the field of ethics or field of aesthetics, about taste or about good and bad, interesting thing is, from generation to generation, people have provided answer to these questions, but no answer has been accepted as final answer. Now, even today, for the ethical problems we are facing are perennial, very ancient. But for these very ancient ethical problems, each generation provides its own answers. Now, providing its own answer, providing your own answer can be a contribution. But that does not necessarily mean what we call new piece of information about the world. Now, I think the point I would like to clear in this context is very often when we try to think about a new knowledge, most of our would-be researchers, they think about reporting, paraphrasing, saying what others said in different language, and things like that. But these things are not really production of new knowledge. When you try to say something, of course, you have to report what others said up to that point. But having said that, if you do not have a point to go beyond that, in other words, you can say, okay, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this. All right, good. You report those things very correctly, which is a very important part of research. But having reported all those so-and-sos in the past, people said, do you also have got anything to say new? Now, if the answer to that question is negative, then of course, you really don't have much there. Now we know that Professor Vangada discussed research proposal a little bit. Now, when we are writing a research proposal, one of the things we do is we are supposed to be doing a literature survey. Now, what is the meaning of this literature survey? Actually, now in many natural sciences and social sciences, we do it in different manners. Now, I remember when we were studying doing graduate studies, computers were fairly new in mid 1980s. But then people were supposed to, in the universities, ask, okay, gather the whole knowledge. I mean, the papers written up to this point, like past 5 years or something. So given. So a researcher will have to go to library those days, go through all these dusty magazines. Now today, of course, researchers' job has been made much, much easier by technological devices. But of course, somehow or other, you have to know practically all the important work that has been done up to this point in order to know that you are making, there is a room for you to make a contribution. Otherwise, how do you know that? In other words, if you do not know the status of the existing knowledge about a subject, then of course you don't know whether you are making any new contribution or not, because you don't know the existing. So the whole point of literature survey is to show that you are familiar with the things done up to this point. Now, particularly not doing this can be disastrous in natural sciences. Like, if you did the research and then, finally, if you find that somebody else has done it for several years ago, then your whole effort is gone, So that happens. So therefore, it is very important for us to know that, the status of the knowledge. So once you know the status of knowledge, then you can sort of make a guesswork. I mean, you still really don't know, but you can make a guesswork. Okay, there is some room open for me to make a new discovery, make a new claim, come up with a new argument. Now, when I say new argument, again, in our Sri Lankan context, we don't talk much about arguments. We talk arguments about only in the negative sense. We argue with people. No, in a philosophic and academic sense, all of us know argument is the way forward. So either for or against, we have to have an argument. What is your argument? Now, if you can come up with an argument either to support or to disprove, either way. Now, disproving can be sort of negative in the academic sense, but of course, that negativity we don't consider in the academia that way, because if you can now count example by Edmund Gettier in a way amounts to some kind of, the questioning and disproving. So argument for disproving or argument for supporting, further argument for supporting, or fresh arguments for supporting, or fresh arguments for disproving. Now, all these types of things can be sort of new knowledge in our field. Now, finally, without taking much more time, how do you get this? I know that all of us agree that there is no easy way to do that, but we have to cultivate this. How to cultivate this would be, as I said earlier, rather than trying to paraphrase, summarize, describe on your own words, we can really should be looking for whether the things said are consistent or inconsistent. Now, if you can find the inconsistency in what the supposed to be a great scholar said, you have made your day by that, inconsistency or a contradiction. Now, in other words, in philosophical language, in the research, what we do is really we investigate. And then when we investigate, of course, we have to have a broad idea. How do you get that broad idea about things? That comes from methodology and also critical use of the existing literature. Let me give you another very usual example. Suppose, sometimes you have seen this, a professor want to do, as Professor Prema Kumar, sociological research, and he want to get some information. So he asked some of the volunteers or, the people in the graduate students studying in the university, okay, you go to that such and such a village and get me this information. So whatever about the population, demographic information and so on. So these students or the workers go to particular place and get all this information. Now they bring the information, and then of course the responsibility for the information, gathering information is done by these people. But what is the difference between this professor who wanted you to bring the information and you who collected, who really got the data? I think that is where the innovativeness and also being able to interpret, being able to see through, being able to see the patterns. Now that marks the difference between you and your senior scholar. And you have the information and you spread this information, of course, on the table in our time, but today you get this information in the computer. And then what are you going to make out of this information? Now, information, I would say, following Immanuel Kant, one of our earlier philosophers, information without interpretation is really blind. But on the other hand, interpretation without information, the raw material is empty. So this is how it goes. But the difference between you and your professor is really now senior scholar sees the patterns. Senior scholar notices, certain new developments. Now, none of these things is written per se on your information. Information is there. Once you see information, then of course your mind goes. But triggering of the mind doesn't come automatically. That triggering of the mind has to be gradually nurtured, developed by reading very carefully, very critically, very analytically, reading with the, this is not a malicious intention, but reading in order to find an inconsistency, in order to find something going wrong, because otherwise, you can't establish I mean, this may sound like negative, but of course, in academically, this is how academia progresses. If we were very, happy with everything what others said, in fact, our sociology or the philosophy, social sciences, humanities will never grow up. Now, at a particular age, particular stage of our academic life, when I listen to number one, I feel that, okay, everything he says is very true. And then when I listen to number two, I feel the same thing. Okay, great. Everything is true. I mean, that shows where we stand at that moment. But don't get discouraged. I mean, all of us have passed that. But still, sometimes we are, in certain cases, in that stage. But there comes a point gradually you tend to ask question, can this be right? Is that okay? Does it sound right? Now, these questions come in your mind, and then you know that you are maturing. You are asking questions. You are probing. You are making inquiries. I think at that point, you are mature enough to do your research. Professor Premakumar, I don't think I should go on like this. So I will allow you to take over, and then maybe we will have a discussion later. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Asanka Tilakaratne. I think he tries to basically, pointed out that how to create new knowledge, basically how to create new knowledge, and how to discover new knowledge, right? Information alone actually won't say anything, right? So that is subject to the interpretation. That interpretation require thinking. That interpretation require philosophical understanding. That is what I gathered it from him. I think that's a very, very valid, interesting point. So let me actually, I won't take that much of time, but I will basically bit of a talk about the picking from both Professor Uyangoda and Professor Professor Asanka Tilakaratne. Both actually bit of a try to highlight the production of knowledge. You see, that's the most important thing: the production of knowledge and production of new knowledge. As Professor Asanka Tilakaratne tried to sort of point out, and how to do that, how to interpret it, and so on. Yes, when it comes to knowledge, actually, yes, we all agreed that we are basically looking at different kind of knowledge. There are so many knowledges around us. There's no question about it. But we need to really, what is the acceptable knowledge? It's very, very important. What is acceptable knowledge in our in our field, particularly the science, the scientific discoveries, the science, the knowledge, the scientific rational knowledge is the acceptable knowledge in the world as a true knowledge, acceptable knowledge. Because there are other knowledges. You have indigenous knowledge, you have other basically Ayurvedic knowledge, then you have other oracle knowledge. There are different kind of knowledge. Actually, the knowledge is basically important for throughout the human history in order to survive, right? But 500 years back, because this transformation taking place in the what we call enlightenment actually project. So there are, of course, new ways of understanding world basically accepted as a true knowledge, that is scientific knowledge, the science, not the theological or the God-given reasons. Prior to that, everything actually analyzed, understood as God-given reason, right? So God has given us, God had created us, God created everything for us. And so that is theological kind of explanation. God actually top of everything, right? But then, of course, human took in charge of that, because the scientific knowledge could able to explain everything around us. Let's say, for instance, Charles Darwin. So Darwin was really attacking on the theological explanation of creations, right? So then the scientific knowledge, astronomical knowledge become very, very important. Copernicus, Galileo's, all kind of knowledge challenge the established other theological, religious kind of exploration of the world, right? So after that, basically, the knowledge produced by the scientific way, scientific research, using scientific methodology, basically accepted as a true knowledge, right? So that is the kind of knowledge that we have been producing through research institute, universities, and all other researchers. So we are basically, we can agree, we all are generating scientific knowledge. In order to generate scientific knowledge require scientific methodology, and that methodology, actually there are so many issues related to methodology. You see, without methodology, you won't be able to produce scientific knowledge. So therefore, science can be basically, divided into two major lines of natural science and the social science. Of course, we belong to social science and humanities, right? So that we are expert of exploring and understanding of social world. So the other scientists, natural scientists, they are terrains of research. Basically, sphere of research are basically focused on natural world, right? So that is the bit of a difference between basically, but we tend to use those natural scientific knowledge to understand the human world. That is where we will actually, Professor Vyangoda has clearly mentioned in his book, even the positivism, positive research started and so on, because that is the philosophical backgrounds of early research, actually borrow from natural sciences, try to actually generate objective knowledge regarding basically on society. Because if I say something about sociology, because now the father of sociology, Auguste Comte, he basically he came from physics. He at the initial stage of that, he want to really develop a science of understanding society, how society works. So that he actually sort of developed at the initial stage social physics, right? So the how actually the physical world being understood by the natural scientific way, the same methodology can be applied to understand social world. You see, the objective knowledge, So is why, but later on, quite late, the positives idea has been basically challenged by other philosophers, because I will come to that. But firstly, you see, there are sciences, because we produce scientific knowledge, right? So the social scientists, so we have natural scientists, we have aesthetic and humanities and so on. That is also a very important area, humanities. Human can create a lot of human language, human can communicate, there are human produce something, literature, drama, sculpture and music, everything. So human has a capacity of doing that. That is where actually there's a difference between human and the animals, so and so forth. I don't have much time to discuss about that. So what is the difference between actually human and science? But one key, one key difference is that the human possesses conscious. When human has mind, human can change the world intentionally, right? So that capacity, because other animals are adapting to the nature, right? So they are not really you see changing the world. So human has that capacity, the thinking, the conscious, the motivation, the intention, right? So therefore human actually can control the world, right? So as a result of that, human actually become the center of the understanding of the world, right? That is where actually human in charge, by displacing the God, right? Earlier, actually, God given reasons people accept all believing the God-given reason, but later on, actually God puts it aside, right? Like Friedrich Nietzsche talk about the death of the God, right? So the philosophical understanding, of centralized in the human realms. Human become, very powerful. They were able to control themselves. They were able to actually produce knowledge about both human world as well as the natural world. So that is the very important, because so therefore, in order to do that, so all sciences require basically methodology, right? So basically natural science generated objective knowledge. Of course, at the earlier social scientists also generate objective knowledge, what we call positivist, right? But in like subject like sociology, anthropology, very much into qualitative, very much into actually subjective knowledge productions and so on, right? So therefore, actually different discipline, even within the humanities and social science, use different kind of methodologies, different kind of methods of, data collections, data analyzing, and reporting as well, right? So if you look at the scale of universe, and there are, of course, human become very important. There are other ways of producing knowledge. There are branches of knowledge production from earth science, space science, social science, life sciences, physical sciences, formal sciences, and so on. There are different disciplines come under those systems of knowledge, right? Social sciences, as I actually mentioned earlier, there are different kind of actually science disciplines, specified, specialized, basically discipline is very much prominent in those social science and the humanities. So that is where actually we are interested in basically human. So we are not interested in natural phenomena. Though even actually now that discussion is going around the world, actually social scientists must also consider the biophysical world as well. That is where actually a lot of encouragements going on to do interdisciplinary, research among both social scientists and humanities scholars, as well as the natural scholars. Therefore, in order to actually understand the human world, you cannot actually ignore the biophysical world, what is happening in the biophysical world, because now we are facing, very serious issue in this world. Let's say for environmental issues. So environmental issues cannot be understood by separating this human world and the biophysical world, right? There are so many such disciplines where actually everything cut across. So therefore, you need to have an interdisciplinary in order to understand not just human world, but also human world within that the biophysical world, right? So therefore, I think we had to really rethink about our approaches when we actually conduct research. We can't just actually confine into the human world, right? So we have to really think about how to locate our research, together with the natural scientists in the biophysical world and a human world. So that's very important when you talk about. But anyway, we are really interested in focusing on our specialty. Our knowledge production is very much concentrate on human, right? So the social, human as a social animal, right? So the what we call social research, right? Social research. So therefore, social research, basically, I think Professor Uyangoda basically explained that. I don't want to really sort of explain it again. But one thing I want to say here is that the social science research might not help you to win arguments, right? But actually, it can challenge certain misconception and prejudices, right? Often accompany those arguments, because as Professor basically Asanga pointed out, you need to develop arguments. Yes, you need to develop arguments, and that you can refute some of the arguments, you can actually further develop arguments, then you can basically disprove and prove, sometimes agreed, you do not agree, sometimes you can give a devastating critique on that particular approach or theory, concept developed by, the scientists, the social scientists, and so on. But at the same time, actually, the social science research can also enlighten us by basically demystifying or basically unveiling the prejudices of what people basically think about certain things. Let's say, for instance, let's say poverty. Poverty can be basically understood by something on karma. This is karma. See, this happened because you have done something in the previous life, in your previous life. So therefore, that is why you are really having all those problems in this country, in this world, in this birth. So there are that kind of prejudices, right? The common sense understanding of the world, so that we are basically challenging that. We try to sort of develop a scientific arguments, scientific way of understanding of issues, problems, right? So therefore, social science research basically enlighten us, or refuting or rejecting the misconception, prejudices, mystification of human problems, human issues, and so on. Yeah, I will bit of a jump because I don't have much of time to sort of go along that. Yes, as Professor Yangoda basically pointed out, there are different school of thought of, understanding the human world. You see, so there are several such basically philosophical foundations of that, I would say. You see, why there are, as I said, positivists, post-positivists, and sort of critical social science. I will come to that later on. But as I said, because now, even though we generate scientific knowledge both in the natural science and social sciences, the subject matter we are studying, what we are focusing is quite different, because we are, as I said, we are focusing on human being. Human being is completely different from the other natural phenomena. So therefore, we require different kind of methodology to understand the subject, the human world, right? So therefore, it is difficult to apply pure natural scientific methods into social science, because we are dealing with human. We are trying to study human behavior. We are trying to understand not just human behavior, what people actually experience, not just human behavior. Human behavior actually a bit of very positivist, right? Human experience, that is much more phenomenological. We are talking about the experience. People can say about the experience to us, share our experience, share of the experience of the war, share of the experience of domestic violence, experiences, the motives behind our actions, right, our behaviors, and so on. So therefore, I think in order to understand that, because people, as a human, we possess conscious. We have a mind. We are doing something intentionally. Our action requires intention. Intentionality. The intention is very, very important word. Intention, right? So unlike our actions, our behaviors are not just governed through just a biological requirement, like ordinary, like animals. We go beyond these biological requirements, human. So therefore, actual human action, human behavior need to be understood through basically different kind of adapting different kind of methodology. Because people have what people do when you observe, let's say very positive is, research method, if you use observation, that is very much actually used by natural scientists a lot, to observe animals, to observe plants. So do kind of experiment in their usually labs and so on. But we also do observation. So observation is one of the key tools for collecting information. The observation, what people do. So we observe without obstructing their basically behavior. We observe. Observation is another tools what we use in very much in anthropology, what we call participant observation, being there in the field, by being with the people. So you collect information, right? So, but that is something entirely different kind of observation. This is just observation, direct observation, right? So we can basically say something about what people do by observing their behavior, but we can't say something about their experience. We can't say something about the experience of what they do, right? Then what they do, just we can see, we can see, feel, touch in our five senses, right? We can understand that, because we can see, we can hear, we can smell, we can touch. So that is what all positivists actually talk about. So that is the absolute truth. We can see, but there's something in our mind, right? So people, how people say about their doing, that's very important. How people say something about their doing, how do you capture that part in our research? That's very important. How do you capture that part? What people say about their doing, their behavior. That's very important. So therefore, they had to adopt different kind of methods, right? Let's say, for instance, they had to allow them to talk, interviews, other forms of actually techniques to be used to get that experience or be with them. Like anthropologists, stay over years of time with the people in villages, thick jungles and all places in order to collect thick information. What Clifford Geer's call actually thick description. In order to do a thick description of a social phenomena, so you need to stay longer period with these people in order to collect reliable, detailed, this is very important word, detailed accounts of or detailed information about people. So that is very much anthropologists would train for that, to collecting thick. Then only you can actually say something concrete about those societies, those behaviors, those situations of society, right? So therefore, I think we need to think about not just actually saying something, because applying a kind of a questionnaire base, I would say questionnaire, of course, you develop a questionnaire, you ask different kind of questions, you have open-ended questions, you can have a Likert scale, you can have other kind of different type of actually questions, right? So then you go and administer that, okay, maximum 1 hour, 45 minutes, or maximum 1.5 hours. All this information, surface, what I call this, just a surface information, right? What I call, not the deep understanding of people, not the experiences, deep experience of people, not the thick understanding of the people. So that is where qualitative comes, right? So I'm not going to discuss about qualitative and quantitative here. So that may be another lecture and all these things, right? So then, of course, questionnaire will give a kind of very positivist. You can give a very objective sort of thing, but you understand it deeper. So you can say generalize, very objective, generalize. You can say something. Yes, fine. You can say something about. There's no harm. You can generalize. You can say some sort of stuff, right? General, but not the such experiences. It's not like something very post-positivist or post or phenomenological or hermeneutics, something like that. No deep understanding of research, right? So now, actually, when we read the PhDs, when we read the masters and field, you see now full of tables, full of bar chart, pie charts. They just put it, then they just actually they just describe these tables. Even actually for a questionnaire-based research, they are not really interpreting that. What data says? What is underneath it? What data says? What information says? They just merely give a description of the tables, and they said that's fine. So that is my analysis, right? So I'm all right. So I did something. So that is not the serious scholarship. You see, that is not the serious one. So there is no huge philosophical flavor in it, roots in it, right? So that you must understand that the philosophical basis of actually human research so important. You can't just merely put numbers and say something about, just a mere description won't say anything, because of based on those mere tables and charts and all kind of stuff. So we are basically taking policy decisions based on those misrepresentations of the problems and so on, right? So as a result of that, there are so many issues in our societies, because scientists say something entirely, they are not really bringing up what is seriously happening in the society, what is really happening in our, the subject that we have a study, basically the problem that we are grappling with, and so on, right? So therefore I think, as both speakers pointed out, the philosophical roots of that very important. Then of course you basically collect rich information, ethnographical information, rich qualitative data. Of course, you also bring quantitative if you want. Then you can triangulate if you want. Then you can, what we call the mixed research, right? So you can bring both positivist as well as the post-positivist philosophical background, but you have to take a chance. You can't just say both. But in order to overcome certain difficulties and limitation of those methodological approaches or philosophical approaches, you can highlight that. You can say about it. So finally, you can think about, okay, anyway, my research largely based on the post-positivists or the positivists, or maybe critical social sciences, right? So there are such philosophical school of thought actually around us. So therefore, you need to basically locate your research. So the philosophy, if you take philosophy of social science for, in order to, as Professor Young to talk about epistemologies as well as the methodologies, there we had to really design what path that I'm going to travel, what positions that I'm taking, methodologically, philosophically, and epistemologically, as well as theoretically, right? The theoretical arguments are also very important. Whether you are going to actually look at that particular phenomena in Marxist point of view, Marxist theoretical perspective, or feminist theoretical perspective, or functionalist theoretical perspective, or post-structuralist perspective. So that you have to decide. That is your training. Or post-colonialist perspective. So there are different theoretical levels to be used in our research, apart from philosophical, epistemological, and methodological understanding of that. But I think I will stop there because there are so many things to be discussed. But I don't want to really take much time because I'm sure we have already passed now about 4:30, 4:40. I will stop there. There are so many things I want to discuss, but I'm not going to discuss that. Anyway, yeah. So I will stop there. Then it is open to discussions, clarifications, uh, so on. Thank you. Professor Yango, do you want to say anything or to summarize?
How long can we go?
Yeah, maybe another,
Oh,
perhaps another, yes,
because we need
half
to
an hour or
some
so.
time for the participants to make comments or to ask questions.
There are certain questions in the chat box actually.
Important, otherwise they don't get a chance to.
Let me, I can't really. My questions for Professor Uyangoda, research, I just read out Professor Uyangoda. Hello. Professor Uyangoda, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I will read out this, the question is in the chat, right?
Yeah.
My questions for Professor Uyangoda, research methods are rooted in epistemological foundations. Then is Professor Uyangoda, can you elaborate it with the example explaining that which method usually we use fall under epistemological? That's what I can really see. Root.
With example explaining that which method usually we use was under epistemological assumptions.
Can you see that?
Let me explain. Now, as Professor Premakumar said, positivism has been the dominant methodological approach in the social sciences, and empiricism is the dominant methodological approaches in the social science, in the natural sciences. So positivism came into the social sciences in the 19th century in the context of a huge philosophical debate among natural scientists and social thinkers as well as philosophers. This begins to place in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now, the debate goes as far back as the early 17th century. There was an English philosopher, Francis Bacon. He was the first person to challenge the dominant Aristotelian tradition of knowledge production. That the Aristotelian tradition had two components. Component one was the rationalism. The second was what's called a deductive logic. Now, deductive logic that has been in those things early Greek times was based on the assumption that you start with an accepted theoretical assumption, and then to find out whether specific instances of a particular phenomenon would fit into that general theoretical assumption called deductive logic. And Francis Bacon pointed out that the Aristotelian rationalism and deductive logic or deductive reasoning did not contribute anything to producing new knowledge. It only confirmed the existing dogmas. Then he argued that most of the what we call scientists today, like technicians, artisans. They didn't do that. They didn't follow the Aristotelian method of either rationalism or deductive logic. What they did was they did experimentation and observation. And what Bacon argued was that reliable knowledge, what is called scientific method, scientific knowledge, cannot be built on either the rationalist or deductive, rationalist approach or the deductive method that has been used for centuries. So then there was an argument that if knowledge to be useful, it has to be based on observation and experimentation. So that is the epistemological assumption of empiricism. Empiricism, the Greek word empirio means experience, the knowledge based on sensory perception. So Bacon's argument is that there were two traditions of knowledge. One is this metaphysical tradition. He included religious knowledge as well as Aristotelian, rationalism into metaphysics. He said the line of demarcation between metaphysics, that is false knowledge, and the true knowledge or reliable knowledge, that is scientific knowledge, was observation, sensory perception. You have to be, you have to observe, you have to, it's very true and reliable knowledge has to be built on sensory perception. In other words, observation. That's why, the scientists in the lab, they do observation. Medical doctors in the hospital, they do observation. And social scientists also do observations. They go to the field. That is based on the assumption that, you study specific cases of occurrence of a natural or social phenomenon, and you collect data on those occurrences, and then you generalize it. What Bacon's so-called scientific method, that those who study logic for their A-level exams would know that scientific method, that has been used in the natural sciences, then later, that came into social sciences, based on the simple formula that Bacon introduced, that authentic, reliable knowledge has to be built on what you experience through your senses. It's called sensory perception. That's the whole idea of empiricism. So then, when the natural sciences actually achieved huge, lot of advances in terms of knowledge, using this empiricist method, not the Aristotelian, deductive or rationalist knowledge, but empiricist and inductive logic. But the inductive logic, the difference between so-called scientific method, which is being used in the natural sciences now, and the traditional deductive method is the deductive logic. It starts with general assumptions, and the scholar tests those accepted truths, axioms, are observable in specific cases. It's called from the general to the specific in the epistemological language. But empiricist method that Bacon introduced challenged that. No, the real, authentic, true, reliable knowledge has to be built on specific cases of observed phenomena and, testing the hypothesis based on existing knowledge and generalizing those specific cases, or the knowledge gained on specific cases. It's called from the specific to the general. So when the natural scientific method began to be adopted in the social sciences or the study of society in the 19th century, As Professor Premakumar pointed out, there was this question: to what extent human society can be studied in the same way the natural world is studied? It was Auguste Comte who first introduced the word positivism. Auguste Comte was a philosopher. He was a physics, scholar, but he wanted to create a social physics. He wanted to create, a science of society. Science of society. So the science, actually, the term science, in a philosophical sense, has different meanings. When you compare the classical Greek and Indian meaning and the post-17th century meaning. And we today use this concept science primarily in its post-17th century, post-Francis Bacon meaning. It was the meaning that has been later further, strengthened by people like Descartes, John Stuart Mill, and David Hume and others. That meaning, the notion of science in this contemporary empiricist sense is scientific knowledge is different from pre-scientific or metaphysical knowledge on the following question. The line of demarcation between metaphysics and science is observation. If you cannot observe anything through your senses, you can't experience. That's not reliable knowledge. That's not authentic knowledge. That's not true knowledge. So to get back to the point that in response to the question that has been asked, so say the dominant methodological approach to social sciences, even today, is this positivist method, which is an extension of the natural science empiricist method, in order to establish a science of society, taking the natural science method as the master method. So social sciences were developed in the 18th century in the image of natural sciences, based on the epistemological arguments of Bacon, and later developed by Descartes and John Stuart Mill and David Hume and others. So then, in the humanities, what happened was, the humanities, the idea is this, the humanities argument, the central thesis is this: human beings are conscious agents. They are not unconscious, inanimate objects, right? Like in the natural world. What is specificity of the human beings is that they make their own world, unlike natural objects. Right? Human beings not only make their own world, but also change their world. They transform their world. Natural objects don't do that. Right? Human beings have a consciousness. As Professor Premkumar says, every human action is an intention-oriented. That's what the phenomenological argument. There was a philosophical school in Europe in the 19th century called phenomenology. And phenomenologists were the people who first challenged the Comte's idea of, bringing empiricism or natural science method to the study of human and social world. They said, no, you can't, because human beings are conscious agents. They not only make their own world, but also transform their world. So in order to understand human world, which human beings make, which human beings transform, you cannot have the natural science method of empiricism. It has to have its own notion of science, which is different from empiricist notion of science. It has to have own objectivity, which is different from empiricist positivist notion of objectivity. That's why, in the literature,
Thank you, Professor Angode.
Yeah. So shall I stop there? Or?
Yeah. I think Professor,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, what
yeah,
I'm
Professor Asan.
humanities method,
Yeah.
humanities research methods are different from the narrowly scientific social science method. That difference, those different approaches evolved in the late 19th century and also early 20th century. There was a huge debate in Europe called Methodenstreit. It's a German word. The meaning of that word, German word, Methodenstreit, is that the quarrel about methods. That was the quarrel primarily between those who wanted to bring natural science method to the study of society, and those who said that no, natural science method is inappropriate to study the human and social world. So humanities methods are very different from positivist social science methods. Actually, they have their own methodological approaches.
Thank you, Professor Yangoda.
Late 19th century.
Professor Yangoda, I think, yeah, I think it's quite clear. And there's another actually questions, Professor Asanta Tilakaratne, you can explain that there's a question related to pragmatism. Pragmatism, what is pragmatism? How it can be used for, in social science research? Professor Asankar. So you are muted.
Professor Premakumar, I didn't get that question. It was very faint. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, that is basically what is pragmatism? How
Okay.
pragmatism? Yes. How can it use for research? What is that philosophy connected with?
Right. Yeah. In fact, I think Professor Yangoda might be able to make the connection between research and pragmatism. More than I can do. But basically, the idea of pragmatism is it comes basically as a theory of truth. What is true is basically, put it in a very simple manner, what is true is what works. Now, interestingly, of course, I don't want to go into debate. This another word which the philosophical view that came from American society is that what is the cash value of any kind of assertion we make. Now, what you mean by cash value is, I think, clear. Any kind of theory or assertion, how can we use that? If that can be used in a fruitful manner, now, that can be taken as true. I think this comes into research field, basically in the natural scientific field, philosophy of science, because most of the philosophers of science really lately have adopted a pragmatic stance. Basically, because it is extremely difficult in certain situations whether to know whether certain thing is true or not, or whether certain thing is beneficial or not. I think this also is applicable to, say, like medical science or something, for example. Ultimately, you really don't ask too many metaphysical questions or too many that type of questions. You simply see what works for larger number of people. Like you take a case of vaccination or something. Ultimately, what is the best vaccination? Best vaccination will be what works for larger majority of people. Of course, secondarily, we look at whether they have side effects or not, and that sort of thing. So pragmatism basically came from, in the modern world, was very much in the philosophy of science. But having said that, I should say that coming from a Buddhist philosophical tradition, pragmatic view has been there from the very beginning. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Buddha said that what works or what has practical value is true or not. Buddha didn't say that. But on the other hand, he always looked at any particular thing, what is the use, what is the major benefit this for the listener or the human society. Now, for example, giving an example from classical Buddhist philosophy, there is a case where somebody asks questions from Buddha on 10 unexplained questions, or what we call certain metaphysical questions, things like whether soul and the life are same, whether the universe is infinite or finite, and I think that basically Buddha did not answer these questions, because I mean, even if the Buddha gave answer, okay, universe is finite or not finite, how can you verify? How can you know that? I mean, you have to have the Buddha's own knowledge. So Buddha's attitude was he did not go into, he said, just keep them aside. They are not useful for your purpose. Now, of course, one can say that, look, this is a kind of, evading the question. I mean, that criticism can be leveled. But from pragmatic point of view, Buddha looked at there are certain things where, of course, beyond your empirical knowledge, and also ultimately you have to see whether you should answer, whether you should spend your energy in answering these things, depending on the practical matter. Now, this is basically how would Buddhism look at. And in the modern science, of course, in scientific research, very often where you come to a situation, you don't assert either way, then of course you go by, now this has been adopted by, for example, I remember when both Professor Uyangoda and myself were studying in Hawaii, philosophy department has one philosopher of science, Larry Loudon. Larry Loudon is one among such philosophers who went into, in addition to, I think, philosophers like Richard Rorty, to whom Professor Uyangoda refers to. Thank you.
Can I very briefly respond to that question, Professor
Yes.
Premkumar?
Yes, please. Yes. Yes.
Pragmatism is, as a philosophical school, teachings of pragmatist philosophical school are used by a lot of non-positivist, non-empiricist social scientists in order to challenge the hegemony of the empiricist philosophy. The way they do is something like this. Now, there was this very hardcore empiricist school that emerged in the 1920s called Vienna Circle. In the Vienna Circle, people were very fundamentalist type, empiricists, who said that there is only one scientific method in the world, that is the natural science method. So there should be a different method for social study of society. There should not be a different method for human society. There should be one single philosophical approach. That is empiricist method, natural science method. So they were arguing for what is called a unity of science and universal science. Bertrand Russell was also involved in that campaign in the 1920s and 30s. But empiricist argument would be something like this. Scientific truths are contingent, not empiricist, sorry, pragmatist. Pragmatist argument is that scientific truths can be contingent, can be context specific. Scientific truths are conventionalist. The conventionalism, the meaning of conventionalism is that there are no universal truths, but there are truths that are, accepted by society, and it's a convention. It's a general consensus in society. So therefore, the empiricist or Vienna Circle argument that the task of science is to prove the validity of existing theories, which is called covering law theory, the Carnap's covering law theory. This pragmatists totally challenged and denied that. The truth can be, there can be many truths. Truth is what a particular society, particular culture would consider as the truth. So this enabled a lot of these people or academics in the United States, challenge the dominance of empiricism and positivism in certain areas of humanities as well as social sciences. So that Richard Rorty has written a book called Contingency, Irony and Solidarity, and a couple of other books Richard Rorty has tried to bring in these philosophical arguments from pragmatism to the study of the humanities.
Right. Thank you, Professor Vyangoda. I think there are several questions, but we don't have much time to basically answer those questions. But one particular questions, I think we must basically, I think foreign scholar might post that. A very interesting question. It says, I think we all can, answer that question. It says, why does scientific knowledge has to be the dominant way of understanding the world and diverse societies in the world? What if we are reproducing existing stereotype through our methodological and so-called objectivity?
Actually, objectivity has been thoroughly challenged by phenomenology, by hermeneutics, and by feminists. There's a feminist philosophy, and feminist philosophy of science has made during the last 3-4 decades some very significant contributions to methodology of social sciences and humanities by presenting totally new challenges, the dominance of empiricism and positivism, the feminist. And actually, there's a notion called social objectivity that was developed by feminist philosophers, and that's a challenge to the empiricist, positivist notion of objective knowledge. Now, notion of objective knowledge comes from the Western scientific tradition, European scientific tradition, primarily, as a challenge to the pre-modern metaphysics. So
this body and mind dichotomy, isn't it?
Yeah, later on, actually, the Cartesian dichotomy. So actually, it's only hardcore empiricists and hardcore positivists who now talk about objective knowledge. But there are so many other radical, post-positivist approaches that have not only challenged the empiricist notion of objectivity, but also have introduced alternative, counter understandings of objectivity. Even phenomenologists in the 19th century tried to produce a notion of objectivity which is different from European empiricist so-called scientific tradition. So if you read some of the work of the early phenomenology and also the contemporary feminist philosophy, we can see this, alternative, radical questioning of the Western European natural science method.
Could I also inject, this particular distinction between fact and value, in fact, comes from this, the assumption of objectivity. I think today, as Professor Vyangoda said, this whole idea has been challenged. One particular aspect of this concept of objectivity is that there is a sharp distinction between facts and values, which no longer is very much respected in the field. I think that's another way of looking at this whole idea of objectivity. Thank you.
Actually, in the philosophy of social sciences and humanities, the traditional binaries are no longer accepted as valid. objective, subjective, fact, value. Those, until about 20, 30 years ago, these binaries dominated philosophy of science and philosophy of social sciences. And there are a lot of people, who totally challenge this, fact value and subjectivity, objectivity, structure, agency, those binary, binary or dichotomies, binaries.
Yeah, this text and context as well.
Yeah.
I think we had really wind up today's meeting. I think that's a very, very after looking at all the comments on the chat, I think they have really, it seems to me they have really enjoyed it. And I think, as you said at the beginning, Professor Yangud and Professor Sankathilak Ratna, this is a kind of a term course that we had really condensed into a 1.5 hours or 2 hours. Basically, I think we have done a bit of a justice to this particular topic. But this is not the the last discussion, but we will continue such discussions in the future. Then of course people can basically join with us. And before winding up, I just wanted to once again thank several individuals. Actually, this particular webinar would not be materialized without support from NCAS, and well as particularly the Sampath, who is our network manager. And also I want to thank Learn, the Peradeniya university-based Learn. Then they have basically specially provide us large number of, can be accommodate up to 500. And also they have given us 3 hours time slot for this particular discussions. Normally they give 40 minutes or 1 hour. And for that support, actually, I want to really thank Learn and their team, and also particularly our two prominent actually speakers today, Professor Sankathilak Ratna and Professor Uyangoda, and those who have participated and those who have basically raised questions, clarification, and encourage us. And thank you very much. I think this is very, very important for our younger generation of scientists in this country, social scientists, humanities, in the field of humanities. I think our pleasure that if you really learn something out of it and you make use of that and you develop a new research culture in this country, not only the university system, but also beyond the university system. I think that is our whole purpose of conducting this this seminar series. To basically disseminate the knowledge, basically critical knowledge, critical way of looking at human issues, engaging with the human issues and so on. So in order to do that, you had to equip it, as we discussed, philosophical, methodological, and basically interpretative, analytical knowledge of doing research in the field of humanities and social science. With that note, once again, thank you very much, everybody, and looking forward to meeting you once again in this kind of meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Premakumar, organizing this, and all of you who are listening to us.
Thank you very much, Professor Premakumar. Then it was nice to listen to you. Okay.
So we can leave now, right?
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, you are very welcome.
Thank you, professors.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was very informative and very interesting to hear. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. And I wish we had more time to respond to the questions. Maybe next time we can do that.
So next time we will have a good discussion session, Professor Yangoda.
Yes, that's very important. So what we can do, actually many of you, I was thinking I wanted to propose this to Professor Premakumar. I'm sure many of you are writing your PhD proposals. And it's quite natural that all of you are also, or if not all of, at least some of you are facing some challenges about formulating your, methodological approach, formulating your research questions, working out your, theoretical framework. So I think, Professor Premakumar, if you can organize a session where the participants talk about their challenges, and then, we as a panel would try to respond to those, queries and, the difficulties and challenges that the participants come out with, and, to see whether, to what extent we would be of some help to them.
Thank you very much, Venkata sir. Actually, our sir, the Professor Premkumar sir is leave the meeting. So I will update the sir. Actually, sir is not poorly.
If you can, suggest or rather give this as a message to Professor Premkumar, so that participants will benefit a lot from, a session like that.
Professor Vyangube, is it okay for me to ask a question from you?
Yeah.
Sir, now since we spoke much about the observation and the critical, how much critical it is there any readings that you can done on observation errors, like specific reasons, especially in terms of qualitative research?
You see, I don't know much about that. You see, I think I can recommend Professor Dr. Pradeep Piris for that, to help you on that.
Okay.
Dr. Pradeep Piris in the political science department.
All right, sir.
Yeah, he will be very, that's his area, one of his areas of methodology. Then who else? Columbia University. I think Dr. Nishara Fernando in the sociology department. He would also be able to, help you on that issue. Anything else?
Professor Vyangode, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've heard about this term descriptive research, and I've heard about like different opinions about it. So, can a research be descriptive? And
research can be descriptive. Actually, many research papers that's coming out of government institutions and some of the NGOs, these are very much descriptive research. The descriptive research is different from interpretative research. That's the distinction. Now, descriptive research, as Professor Premakumar also pointed out, describes a situation based on, observed data, right? But it does not interpret data from a theoretical perspective. You see, to interpret data, you need a theoretical perspective. So the data by themselves don't tell us stories, right? Data tell us stories only we look at data through the eyes of a theory. So for interpretative research, I think Professor Premakumar made this point a couple of times. To interpret data, you need a theory. Without a theory, you can only describe. For example, you have a statistical table and you make a description of it. This what says, according to age group or income levels or whatever education level, this what you describe. So many of the government reports, you can say that descriptive research. Many of the UNDP research, I have seen UNDP research, these are descriptive research because they merely describe data without providing a theoretical interpretation. So that's the distinction. There are descriptive research, but descriptive research have a limited contribution to the growth of knowledge. The growth of knowledge, you need not only description, but also interpretation and a theory-based argument. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. I mean, the reason I ask in the field of fine arts, this is Sudesh. So in the field of fine arts, sometimes
fine arts.
Yes, for example, one can go to a site and describe, like for example, let's say painting, or go to a ritual site and describe what is being obvious to the researcher, and without interpreting what he has been seen. So how can so that in that context, I was asking that question.
Yes, Sudesh, there are two. You see, suppose you observe an artifact and you describe it the way you see it. Even one can argue that seeing itself is an interpretation, right? You see, when we look at something, suppose we look at an artifact, right? When I describe it, that description itself is informed by some kind of pre-understanding, right? But it doesn't have a conscious theory to inform the interpreter. So the description itself can be argued as an interpretation. But theory-grounded interpretation is different. When you look at something, you try to interpret in theoretical terms, but it's a conscious effort, to describe what you see and what you describe as what you see, and then you try to make a different sense of it. That's why I say aesthetic theory or cultural theory. A lot of anthropologists do it, anthropological accounts. That's why I think Professor Premakumara used an expression called thick description. That's a term that Clifford Geertz, an anthropologist, introduced to anthropological vocabulary. Thick description is, in-depth accounts. That description itself has a theoretically informed nature. It's not what, it's not what we kind of superficially describe, but it's a theoretically informed account or description. That's called thick description or thick accounts in anthropology.
Thank you, sir.
May I say something about that?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, Professor Premakumara.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I think what Sudesh you see now, just describing merely artifact is, you can interpret it different way. Let's say, for instance, you can basically interpret it in terms of symbolism, right? The symbolic meaning of that particular artifact, right? And also psychological dimension of that particular product. So there are many ways of looking at that. Even the producers of that particular artifact, the author, you see, and the sort of a context of in which that particular artifact's being produced can be actually looked at in a different way. So there are so many ways of interpreting that. The description can, go along that interpretation. As Professor Yangad also pointed out, there are many ways of actually interpreting things. You see, not just merely descriptions. Descriptions won't bring anything, as Professor Yangad pointed out. You see, it doesn't say anything. Just merely you describe what you see. but you are not really looking at the text underneath it. So there are several layers of that particular thing. You had to really unveil all those layers. That is what actually researcher must do in their interpretation and the analysis. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for both professors.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir, I have a question, sir.
Yes.
Sir, now this is regarding conceptual papers, sir. So I just want to know, sir, is there any philosophical foundation to write conceptual papers, sir? Now, I mean, in terms of methodology part, sir.
What's a conceptual paper?
Um,
First time I heard that. Conceptual
I mean, sir, now these days some of the scholars are writing research papers based on secondary data, since it is unable to gather primary data due to COVID. Like I have found some research articles, the research strategy was called DEX research strategy, and in some articles the methodology was literature review. Then I was just confused, sir, like.
No, there's a desk research is that you don't go to the field, right? You don't do interviews or anything. You don't make any field research. You are doing basically literature survey. It's a literature survey based research. But literature review is different thing.
Okay, sir.
Literature review and literature survey are two different exercises. Now, literature survey is that, you know, you go to the library, you go to the archives, you go to the internet, and, you know, it's like a desk research. You know, your entire research process, the primary source of information is the documents that are available either in the library or on or online, right? But literature review is a different exercise. You see, as Professor Premakumar and Professor Asanga also said, when you are doing a research project or when you are writing a research proposal, you have to make an argument or you have to make the point that your research will produce something new in terms of knowledge, or your research will be able to make a fresh contribution to the existing body of knowledge on the subject you are dealing with. Now, how do you prove that you are making a fresh contribution? So in order to prove that you are making a fresh contribution, you have to identify the gaps in the existing body of knowledge, which we call knowledge gaps. In order to find out knowledge gaps, you have to critically review the existing body of knowledge on that subject. Right? You have to review the books, journal articles, unpublished theses. Then you are critically engaging with the existing body of knowledge. That's what is called literature review. So literature survey is a little more it's less than, its scope is less than the literature review. The literature survey is that you just survey the literature. You know, that's all. You prepare a bibliography and then you read them and you make just comments and you write something descriptive about the literature. So you are not reviewing, you are not critically reviewing the literature. Literature review calls for critical review of the literature. Literature survey is an exercise in descripting, you can even classify, but this is a descriptive exercise. Is that clear? The distinction.
Yes, sir. Then, sir, that knowledge gap, I think it is different from contextual and empirical gap, isn't it, sir?
No, sometimes in the knowledge gaps, There can be empirical gaps also, because in terms of data, suppose there's a particular phenomenon, say social issue, say, for example, the rural indebtedness among, tenant farmers. So there can be, gap in the empirical knowledge of it. We don't have data. That means what we have a real gap in our empirical knowledge about the rural indebtedness among tenant farmers. So my research, I can argue that my research seeks to fill that gap, right? By bringing empirical data on that particular theme.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, then we can, now it's 5:30, we might lose this learn link in a little while. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. Our director, Prem Kumar sir, is there, sir. Shall we wind up?
Sorry?
Our director, Professor Prem Kumar sir, is there. I think I am going to wind up, sir. I think with the thank you very much on behalf of NCAS to all, sir, Asanka sir and Vengudu sir.
Sure.
And
thank
for our director. So I will wind up the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sampath.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.